you go to a party and you say to someone, I like Formula One, the first thing that they normally say is Formula One a sport? And then someone else will say, yeah, I agree, Formula One isn't a sport. And that'll get taught and you'll think, it's motorsport. Of course it is. Lewis Hamilton and all the other 20 drivers are known as being athletes in a sport. It's included in Sports Personality of the Year, and that has sport in the name. Formula One has always been on that debate. It is a motorsport, but is it a conventional sport along with football, along with basketball and everything else in the world? Before we get into any of that, I'm just going to read you out a statement from Google. So if you, of course, type in your search engine a question, it answers, and this is Google's answer to, is F1 a real sport? It says, well, it isn't just a sport, it's a motorsport. Formula One is the pinnacle of motorsports. The FIA Formula One has been... Stop. That is a bloody tongue twister. Right, stop that. I'll start again, right? Don't stop. I'll start again. I'll start the whole episode again. When you meet someone at a party and you say you like Formula One, the first thing that they normally say is Formula One a real sport? Then someone else will say, I agree, I don't think Formula One's a sport. And the ball gets rolling in that way. It's quite hard for an F1 fan to talk up and really give their reasons why it's a sport. Of course it is, or in our opinion it is. It's a motorsport. Lewis Hamilton and the 20 drivers in the FIA Formula One Championships are sportsmen. It is a sport. It's included in Sports Personality of the Year and it's covered on Sky Sports. Both things that have sport in the name. So we know it as to be a sport. If you have a question, you type it into Google, and this is the answer for Google's answer to, is F1 a real sport? Google, as I say, Google says, well, it isn't just a sport, it's a motorsport. Formula One has been the pinnacle of motorsports, and the FIA Formula One has been in this world since 1950. Before that, there used to be Grand Prix series around the world. Teams and fans of F1 don't normally see it as a sport. They see it as a beyond that. F1 is life for them. It's life. Didn't really make sense, but that's Google's answer. Just some random guy sitting in the Google headquarters somewhere in America answering the question of Formula One. Is it a sport? Now, again, I just said that to us, it definitely is. Teams start a year. We have a season, whenever that's going to be. How many drivers and how many teams will, of course, change. But it always starts in one race, round one, ends with round whatever and the final race of the season. We have points for races, drivers get points, a table is made, 2 tables for the drivers and the constructors. Awards are given to people where they finish in the table, and of course if you finish in first place for both the team and the constructor, you get a championship to finish. Basically, a lot of sports, or every sport, goes in that direction. So for example, using the Premier League, for example, 20 teams start on the Premier League, of course, have worked all the way up to that. They'll play around 38 games in the season, of course, determined from September to May. Over the course of playing, of course, the teams in that table. The winner, which of course this year, or last year even, was Liverpool, they got the Premier League title because they scored the most points. And of course the loser, who doesn't win the many games, can get relegated or whatever your rules are in that sport. Very similar to F1. As I said there, the champion, Lewis Hamilton or whoever it is, will get the championship, and wherever you finish in the table is important, both for awards and also your personal gain. So it works very similar to many of the sports out there in the world. But to some people it will still elude them. Is this a sport? Now, it's just broken down on Google and said it is a motor sport. Of course, it's got motors in them, 4 wheels and an engine, and that is Formula One. So is there a difference between motorsport and sport? And can you definitively say F1 is exactly the same in terms of sport and ability, and Lewis Hamilton and all 20 drivers on the grid are exactly the same athlete-wise to someone else? So for example, Mohamed Salah, Virgil van Dijk, or Odell Beckham Jr., are they exactly the same as the other athletes in those different sports? So Jordan, of course, you know, we absolutely love our sports. Even if they're British, we also live in national sports as well, and of course I like American sports and things like that. So we spend most of our time watching sports. Formula One is on Sky Sports, as I've just said there, so it's got a sport in the name. We can go home, but not yet. Got to talk about this first. Formula One, is it a sport? I know you're going to say yes. So yeah, would you say to somebody who, let's say, would say to you, Formula One's not a sport, what would your kind of first thing you would say to them be about? And why would someone say to you, F1 is not a
Well,
sport.
I think sport is mainly obviously based around competitiveness, because every single sport there has to be a competitor. There is more or less a winner in terms of like an individual performer or a team as a whole. So that's kind of like a definition of a sport, and it's an entertainment as well. So, and it's also that's like the abbreviation of it in the dictionary. Go and look it up as well. It at the very last line it'll be it's like and entertainment. So every single sport is entertaining to somebody in some degree, and if you don't really find it entertaining, you're not going to find that sport interesting at the same time. So if someone was to say to me, Formula One, okay, Jordan, Formula One isn't a sport, I will go, right, okay then. So you're telling me that a group of drivers who fly around the world, who have to travel a lot, by the way, who have, no rest, well, very little rest whatsoever to prepare for a Grand Prix in terms of like going to the gym, in terms of being prepared, mentally and physically preparedly fit to drive a race car. Because in a lot of people's eyes, it's they're just sitting in the car and driving around a track for. In fact, no, it's not even that. It's they're sitting in the car and driving around in circles for a good few hours, and I'm like, whoa, hang on a minute. There's just so many wrong things in that statement, because you're not just sitting in the car. There's many things going on behind the scenes. It's a team game. It's an entertainment as well. And also, like I said, in the team aspects as well, like every single sport has a team behind them, even if it's just one person individually performing on the day. So, for example, you've got tennis, for example. There's no team involved. You can't see a physical team on the go all the time. But behind the scenes, there is. There's people who are training the guy. There's people that are, helping him heal if he gets injured. There's people, practicing him as well, in coaching as well. So there's loads of, and dietitians, there's loads of things going on behind the scenes as well in terms of a team. And Formula One is no different. Like there's loads of people in one Formula One organisation. So you've got about 500-600 people at the track, then you've got even more back at base analysing over data and stuff. So, and that as a whole, that might not seem as a sport look kind of thing, but it is, because everyone else is working as a whole, as a team, to find the edge or find a couple of tenths here and there to make maybe that race or even the next race a bit better than maybe if you're not performing well at that particular race as a whole. And as well, it's very physically demanding on a particular driver. Drivers roughly lose about 1 or 2 kilograms of weight throughout the course of a Grand Prix, using your arms, using a lot of your neck as well, and that's why you've got to be physically fit to drive a Formula One car. And as well, like I said earlier, it's an entertainment. It's a show almost, which also kind of brands it into a sport, more entertainment wise, because it's on the edge of your seat. It happens on a weekend as well, which doesn't really class it as a sport in that kind of degree. Because it happens on a weekend, it's like, so what, going out clubbing on a weekend is classed as a sport? No, that's not what I'm saying as well. But also as well, like, it also brings a lot of people together as a community, which sport does a lot. And I think that you could add a little pinch of that as well in the definition of, is Formula One a sport? Because a lot of people tend to watch sport and maybe get away from life's troubles and maybe just go, right, okay, let's block everything out and let's focus on, let's say, Formula One or even football or whatever for that matter. So yeah, it can get very like annoying and confusing when you do hear someone say Formula One isn't a sport, and in my opinion, of course, it is going to be, and maybe for yours too. But I know there are some people out there who are Formula One fans, even racing drivers themselves have turned around and said that F1 isn't a sport. And one of those guys is currently on the grid at the moment. Romain Grosjean, he said this back in February, where he said Formula One, it isn't a sport. In his own view, it's not a sport, it's a show, it's an entertainment. So, and the reason for that is because Formula One isn't competitive. One team just dominates the field and leaves everybody for dead. They spend the most money, they spend the more development, they leave the field, there's no competitiveness at the front for wins. You know who's going to win more or less at every single track, more than likely Mercedes, as we know now, and other midfield teams, they're not going to do anything because they don't have the pace or the facilities or the money to challenge the top runners, which, like I said, is of course Mercedes. He's got a slight point with that. I understand where he's coming from, but I would say to that, well, it's still very, like I said earlier, it's still a team game. It's very, like I said, exercise involved, dieting involved, a lot of nutrition as well, which is the same happens in football. And again, would you class that as a sport? Well, of course you would. So in that sense, you should class Formula One as a sport as well. And as well, actually bringing football back into it. And not just that, but other sports as well. If you spend a lot of money on your team, let's say, so if you spend a lot of money on a football team, or if you're like an individual person, like maybe a snooker player or a darts player, or even a tennis player, like I said, if you spend a lot of money on your like team, if you find the best trainer, the best medical facilities, the best place to to relax or whatever, or the best physios and stuff, you're going to perform better because you've got the money to go out and get the better equipment. Therefore, you can perform better on the day. So, that sense, Formula One, like top teams like Mercedes, they're doing the same thing in the same way like football is. So, like for example, Man City, they spend millions upon millions on their team to try and win the league, and of course, they're not the only ones. Other teams do as well. And that's the same with Ferrari and the same with Red Bull. They spend a lot of money on their car, hence why they're kind of ahead of the field, taking 2020 out of the equation. Recently, they've been the top three: Merc, Ferrari, and Red Bull. They've spent a lot of money on their team, the best facilities, the best designers, or whatever, and that's why they're doing so well. And then you look at the other end of the grid, the midfield teams. They're not doing so well because they're not spending the most money. So there is a bit of a divide in that sense, and you can understand why maybe Grosjean and various others are saying, well, it's not competitive, so therefore it isn't a sport. But in every single division of sport, you've got that one team that dominates for a amount of period and then fades away, then maybe the next one comes in, or even goes through a patch of where one or two teams starting to do well for whatever reason, because maybe their team isn't gelling together, maybe they've had an injury, or they're just not performing because maybe they've reached their peak, or they haven't reached the potential that they were tipped to do. So, does Romain Grosjean have a point when he says F1 isn't a sport, it's a show, because there is no competitiveness at the front? What do you think about that, Lyle, as well? And Romain Grosjean wasn't the only one to say this. Former Marussia driver Max Chilton also said the same thing. He was saying about IndyCar, and GP2, he was saying that like it was on a level playing field, that, well, GP2 is classed as a sport, or Formula 2 is a sport, because everyone's got more or less the same equipment. But in the similar sort of sense in IndyCar, it's more competitive, it's more close together. That's more of a sport than Formula 1 is. Is Romain Grosjean and Max Chilton right in that degree, Lyle? Do you agree that maybe if something isn't competitive, it shouldn't be classed as a sport?
Well, I think firstly, when Grosjean said that, I think maybe this is a hint of, like, maybe he said it after a race or something, or he's thrown a choice out the pram a little bit. Just because, I mean, of course, that's going to be, if he would see it as not competitive because the cars that he's been in, I mean, I assume that was from like this year, in Haas, especially last year, but he's been in the Haas, and over the years when he's been in his Lotus and things like that, haven't been at the front, but he's been just competing against them. But of course, because of what the things you've said about the money and stuff, Mercedes, of course, are going to be at the front, and he's not going to be as good. But again, like, that would be exactly the same as any other sport. So he said that he's got no chance or very little chance, and Mercedes are dominating all the time. So again, in football, you would look at, so last season, you would look at, for example, a game, it would be Liverpool-Norwich at Anfield. Norwich would have very little chance to beat Liverpool. Liverpool, of course, would be the favourites. They would be the favourites. You would win one penalty, put on £1,000 on them on the bet in that. And Norwich wouldn't have a very good chance. That's very similar to Mercedes versus Williams. But that's not saying it's impossible for that to happen. Norwich could beat Norwich could beat Mercedes, Norwich could beat Liverpool, and we've seen things like that happen before. Midfield battles and drivers finishing ahead of other drivers and things like that. I mean, just look at the amount of people who beat Sebastian Vettel on pure pace, no penalties or anything, just on pure pace at Silverstone. It's incredible. People finished ahead of Sebastian, who probably were thinking, I've beaten the 4-time world champion. I can't think of the first person who would do that, but the AlphaTauri drivers, no chance, and they would think that. Again, McLaren walked it and things like that. So it's very similar to football in that way. I'm not saying that he's got a point, because again, that's the competitiveness about it. The field is, of course, going to get stretched out at some point. This season we saw Liverpool ran away with it. We've never seen that before. We've seen the competitiveness, but we've seen them run away with it. And again, I wouldn't say that was non-competitive about it. And for two reasons. One, because of course they deserved that, and they were building a good team. But secondly, because we had the midfield fights to look at. So again, me and you, John, we're Newcastle fans. We were looking at the mid. We're always looking at the midfield. We're not really ever looking at the front or the back. We're looking at the midfield. Where we finish. We're always around 10th, 11th, 12th, 13th, 14th, 15th is probably our lowest. That's where we always are, and that's what we're looking at. And in comparison, in Formula One, that's where you not saying you should be looking at, because again, you'd hope that things were happening more competitively at the front. But again, if that's not happening, you should think, well, okay, I'm not going to look at the Liverpools, and I'm not going to look at the Man Cities, Man U, Chelsea's, Arsenal, possibly Leicester. I'm going to look at the the midfield battles, the Evertons, the Bournemouth, the Newcastle, stuff like that. And maybe that's where it's more entertaining. So I don't think I don't think he's completely right in that. But one thing I was about to say, obviously in terms of talking about Formula One as a sport, again, you look at the athletes that do it. So again, with football, these players, coming through the academies, and of course Britain, English football and things like that have been very, very popular. Well, this, the best league in the world for football, the Premier League, that's where all the best players come through. Thousands and thousands and thousands and even millions in academies, and obviously they all get kind of filtered up how good they are into teams, going through the leagues and things like that. So again, let's look away from the sport and let's look at the athletes that you have to be. So again, Formula One, got 20 athletes, 20 drivers. But again, like football and like other sports, they haven't just got to Formula One. They've gone through other ranks. Some of them have missed out Formula 2, but again, they've all come from things, and probably the circle that they've all expanded from is, of course, go-karting. So again, all these drivers, spending money to get a go-karting, physically fit, they've got to be fast, of course. That's the main thing you always look at. And again, going back to like the typical party person who might mention it, John, like we said at the start, again, that would be the are they fast? Actually, I just want to stop the episode for a minute and just say one thing. I want you to leave it in the comment section below. Have you ever heard anyone say this statement? I've heard this loads. I've heard it at work. I've heard it at uni when I've been watching Formula One. Have you ever heard somebody say, because you can obviously, if you want to go and play football, like not now, obviously, like say before this COVID happened, if you wanted to play football, you could easily go down to the pitch and play. If you wanted to play tennis, they've got a tennis centre like 10 miles away from me. It's easy to go to places where they played sport. I mean, I even can go to like an American football pitch. So again, has anyone ever said to you, have you ever driven a Formula One car? Jordan, that looks, you like Formula One, yeah? Have you ever driven a Formula One car? Have you ever had the chance to do that? What's it like? Have you ever wanted to drive a Formula One car and you think, it's not that, it's all, no. It's not going to happen. It's no. And that leads me on to the next point I was going to say. Obviously, athletes, when we see footballers and rugby players and tennis players and all that, we think they're athletes, and it's more kind of easy to get into that because it's so easy for us to go and do that. I'm not saying it's easy to play football. I didn't mean that. I meant like the accessibility is. Again, at the football pitches, you'll see hundreds of kids, from all different ages and all different abilities. They'll be playing football, and of course some of them will be doing it for fun, but some of them will have it in the idea that they want to get better and they want to climb the leagues, and yes, some of them might even think they want to make it to the Premier League. It's so easy to go and play tennis, and it's so easy to go and basically do every sport you want apart from Formula One. Yes, you can go karting, it's not impossible, and of course a lot of people do it, but maybe that's one of the reasons why people don't think it's such a sport in the same way as like football is, just because it's not as easy, it's not as accessible for many people to do. So again, as I just said there, if you want to go be a Formula 1 driver, you have to start through karting. Again, it's not completely done, so when the Premier League might be the top level for you as a footballer, if you want to stay in England, for example, Formula 1 isn't it's a pinnacle, but it might not be your route. Of course, you can go into Formula E, like we've just seen with the Dutch driver Nick de Vries. He won Formula 2. His goal was to go to Formula 1, but he took a very quite strange tangent to Formula E, and I don't even know how he's doing in that. I don't really watch Formula E, but I assume quite well. But it's definitely a tangent of what he didn't really think he'd be doing. Of course, we all expected him to go to Formula 1. So, you go through karting and all that, but it's not as accessible as football or anything like that. But they are still very big athletes, and the way that they've started in their sport is definitely good. They've committed to it, and of course, as you just said there, they've got to be incredibly fit in terms of their body. Basically just the normal kind of building yourself up at the gym. Being lean, being fat, being muscular. To of course deal with things like G forces in the car, and of course strength in terms of steering wheel and things like that. But the accessibility of Formula One, is that another reason that kind of holds us back from a sport? Because it's not as easy to go and play Formula One. Well, yeah, you can't go and play Formula One like coming from school. You know, what are you going to do tonight? I'm going to play Formula One. I mean, I guess you can on F1 2020, but not in real life. So, Jordan, is that another reason why? And again, talk about like the road of an athlete into Formula One compared to an athlete into football or any of the other sports. Obviously, again, like we watch like tennis and things like that on Sky Sports.
I think that adds like another unique aspect to Formula One, that the fact that you can't just go down your local park and just, like you said, just jump into like just go on a go-kart track like they're very accessible these days. Like they're not, like they're few and far between. You've got some really, really good ones, some really good outdoor ones, professional ones, but for some of them you require a license to go on that particular track, so you can't exactly rock up to a really professional go-kart track, let's say, and just all right, let's absolutely blitz it, because you might need a license, you might need a proper go-kart, for example. Like the track might not be able to provide you one because it might not be there for entertainment purposes. You've got indoor ones which are pretty good, but I think outdoor go-kart tracks are pretty more realistic in that degree. So I think that just adds in a different like unique aspect of that as well. But I think the main thing is about this rule is like it's like the physicality of it, like the physicality of like Formula One itself. It's very demanding, like I said, on the body, and it's very demanding on the human and on every man or woman who wants to potentially drive Formula One or even try to drive an F1 car in that degree. Because if you're driving a go-kart around the track, you know how aching your arms are afterwards. After like 20 minutes, you're just like doing that. It's like, physically it's demanding. You're like, I've done some exercise, so like. Have you done a workout? Yeah, in a way you have. So is it classed as a sport in that degree? Then yeah, absolutely. Then you're probably saying to us, all right, then, what about darts? Or snooker, for example. You don't need to be a bloody athlete to play that, do you? Well, no, of course you don't. But it's entertainment. It's competitiveness, which again, Formula One is. So it's like, you're putting two and two together here, and it's like, well, Formula One, it is a sport. It has to be a sport. It's a motorsport. You know what I mean? You've got, like Lyle said, four wheels and an engine. You've got a champion at the end of that particular season. You've got a team around you, and like what Roman Grosjean was saying before about being a show. Then yeah, and also as well, like I said before about the whole competitiveness of it. Like how one team is running away with it, just being totally dominant. It's not classed as a sport. So when the cars were being competitive. Back in back in the day of the not early noughties, but maybe like 07, 08, that kind of era, even 2010, 2012, that kind of degree. Would you class F1 as a sport then or not? You can't just go, one year it's not a sport, or next year it is a sport. Doesn't make any sense in that regard. But one team in particular is always going to be the more successful or the better out of the lot, whether that's in history or even in recent time. They've just hit the nail on the head, and they're more prepared more than anybody else. I mean, I can understand why people look at it from the outside point of view in terms of like saying it isn't a sport, it isn't what it is, because everyone see it. They turn this simple down Formula One by saying, like I said earlier, they're just drivers in a car around a track for an hour or so, like round in circles. That's nothing. You're just driving a car. But in every single sport, you can kind of simplify it. Like in football, you're just kicking a ball into a goal. In cricket, you're just hitting a ball as far as you can. In tennis, you're just hitting a ball back and forth to you.
I know one for cricket. So in cricket, you've got these people that wear white on a field. Half of them are wearing helmets, and half of them aren't wearing helmets. And like, why some of them wearing helmets and some of them not wearing helmets? As you said, Joe, if I was going to say that to somebody, I would say that. I was like, why are you wearing a helmet and why is he not wearing a helmet? So yeah, that would be mine. That'll be yours. Can someone tell me as well in the comment section below why in cricket do like half of the people, and I don't just mean like the batsmen, it's like random people are wearing helmets. Some of them are wearing helmets, some of them are not wearing helmets. And why? And why does like the referee or the umpire, I think you call them, wear like the kind of Crocodile Dundee hat? They've always got one. Why can't they just wear like a simple cap? Maybe like a branded one, maybe like a Lewis Hamilton one, or because he's got some limited edition ones out this weekend. So maybe the umpire of like the next cricket game should wear like a red L.Hamilton cap. I think that would look cool. But yes, anyways, back to what you were rambling about.
What a bit of a tangent, isn't it? but yeah, like people seem to simple it down as just to that, and I mean, people have probably turned around and said that football isn't a sport. Because we compared the two because we do like our football in that regard, and
we're British and we're biased.
Exactly, and you could say, well, okay then, guys, you've compared football about saying, okay, well, what actually. An example of what Lyle said before about Liverpool against Norwich. Norwich, they don't have a very good chance of beating Liverpool for say, or even anybody else going up against one of the big teams like City, United, Chelsea, or even Arsenal, if you want to class them as a big team, but that's entirely up to you. Hi, Mike. But obviously there's always that chance that they possibly could, and that particular team could not be performing on the day. They could have their tactics wrong. They could have their preparation wrong. And you could say, well, in Formula One, it's all about it. It's not up to the driver or anything to get that job done. It's to the car. It's got to be up to their standards. It's got to be on speed. But also, in the same way, well, the best car could go to a certain circuit and just totally have no pace at all and go it just has a big off day, or even like they get a puncture, they have a problem with the car breaks down for whatever reason, because it's very rare that a team or even a driver does badly because of the driver itself isn't up for the job, it's not up for the day, because you've got to be alert at all times in Formula 1. It's very rare you can rest. Even in the pit stops, you've got to be like, right, okay, clutch down, wait for that light, release clutch, off you go. Make sure there's cars not around you or anything when you leave the pit. Even when you're overtaken, or you're always looking, you're always alert. But in football, most of them you just stand around, walking around, So, Formula 1 drivers are being much more physical than what they are with football. It's just how you see a sport and how you see it in your own eyes, in your own vision. So, I remember when I was younger, I used to always say cricket. I used to slay cricket and go, well, it's just people hitting a bat. I don't understand it, blah, 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 blah. Because I don't follow the sport. I don't understand the rules. I don't understand how it works. So in that regard, I wouldn't say it's not a sport, because it is. But I remember probably when I was younger, I probably would say it's not a sport. But I would say F1 is. And I think a lot more people class cricket as a sport than what they do with Formula 1. And I think and also as well, like, last point on this, I would say that, with people saying F1 isn't a sport, it just shows how underappreciated Formula 1 actually is. Because, that saying as well, like I said a couple of times in this episode, like, it's just people go around, it's just cars go around the track in circles, cars go around in circles for every single week, and it's like, well, no, it's just, there's so much more to it than that. People, like I said, we've travelled to Italy to go and watch a Formula 1 race, it's not really. Would you class it as a festival? Not really, because festivals is more down to music and stuff. It's more of a big get together, supporting one in particular team. Which as well, if you're supporting somebody, if you buy their merchandise, that could be a little as well classing into a sport as well. I mean, Lyle, we've heard it all before, haven't we? About F1 as well, how it's not this, it's not that, it's boring, blah blah blah. So. If you had one thing to say to those who maybe are watching this and are going, guys, to me it's not. Maybe there are some F1 fans who maybe are going, it isn't a sport. They could agree with a lot of people inside with them and go, yeah, it isn't a sport. It's just a show. It's a one big show. What would you say to those? Maybe if you're your average Joe or whatever, just going, yeah, F1 isn't a sport. What would your response be to those people?
Go away. I don't want to talk to you. Whoever says that, no. Click away. No, please stay with us. Well, obviously, firstly, like I said at the start there, Formula 1 ran very similar to all the other sports out there. So again, I'll rehash it quickly. Obviously, we start off in Australia, end up in Abu Dhabi, 20 or so rounds, but again, that will always change. Taken out, of course, this season, as we do. 20 drivers start, 10 teams start, tables are made up for each of them. It all starts from zero as well, so whatever happened in 2019, so whatever happened in 2018, for example, is forgotten about. So move in, everyone's on zero. So Lewis is exactly the same as Kubica, let's say, or this year Lewis and Latifi. And we have a race. People out, you get win. If you win, you get the maximum points. If you come second, you get more points in third, but less than first. And you know how it works. And of course, drivers compete to be in different spots. So that's where it's competitive.
It's a competition.
It's two teams, drivers and constructors, And at the end of the season, I mean, I said all this at the start, but at the end of the season, you get a reward. So very, similar to every other sport out there. Of course, different sports are ran differently. For example, like I say, the Premier League has done 38 games over one season, and then afterwards you would win the Premier League. Of course, other things like the FA Cup and the League Cup run alongside that, but obviously that's not the Premier League that do that. But in football, you would have that. So you have the Premier League table and you have other things as well. There are knockouts, of course. So again, that's like you play a game. If you lose, you're knocked out. And the Premier League is... So again, even though Norwich would obviously keep losing all the time, they would tumble down the bottom, but they would stay for the entirety of the season. Some sports like NFL and NBA, they're ran, of course, where you play a normal season. If you qualify for the playoffs to win, for like the Super Bowl or the basketball championship or the Stanley Cup in hockey, for example, and obviously some sports do both run exactly the same time, like the Super League in rugby. So we have a table. That's why it's competitive, and that's the competitiveness is really the forefront for sport. I think as soon as a sport becomes competitive, it is a sport. And you just said there at the start there, John, about things like darts and snooker. I know you like darts, but again, and that might not be me understanding the sport. So again, I don't think I'm in a position to really say, do I think darts is a sport? Standing around. Yes, of course, standing around. They just chuck something at a board and drink beer. But again, John's just said there, that is what people say about F1, and that's exactly what people say about cricket. So I don't think I could actually say, is dart a sport? I actually remember when I was younger, I used to, again, obviously I didn't watch much American football, but again, when I used to see it, and obviously our main sport is rugby over here, league or union, but you have seen it. Again, I would think, and I've said it and stuff, and I know people that would say, there's a lot of standing about, one play and it's over. The ball doesn't hit the ground. It's not flowing like rugby is, and there is a lot of waiting about. I mean, you think they play 60 minutes on field, 60 minutes on the clock, but the games are about 5 hours long. You're like, really? And then first game I watched, loved it. And that would be the same as really a lot of sports that I've watched out in the past. And I'm not saying that I'd love darts because I have watched it before, but like, if I watched cricket, I'm sure I would warm up to it. You understand the rules, and stuff. Obviously, again, we all the sports have weird rules, like again John was saying earlier on. So it's every sport's different, and I think that's one of the things. Sometimes you say we can put them together, but in some way we can't. And again, if you remember one of the videos I did all the way back in January, said NFL to Formula 1. Again, that was only obviously me and John did a Premier League to F1. Again, that was only a bit of a jokey thing. But again, you remember they're different. They are two different sports in that way. So every sport is different. But the competitiveness is what makes F1 a sport for sure. And the second thing is the athletes. When you see Lewis Hamilton, I mean, he is the pinnacle of what an athlete is. He's incredibly. He's got a very, I say nice body, but yeah, I'm gonna say that. We're talking about sports. I don't care what you think. Nice body, nice muscular tone. Obviously, he's very, very fit and athletic. What he does, and you need to be to drive a Formula 1 car. And it shows that anyone who isn't fit and anyone who isn't, of that build will not do very well. I mean, again, you sort of saw it in Barcelona. Nick Tiffy, George, please stop taking shirtless photos on Instagram. George looks like that because of the years and years and years he spent going from all of his categories, Formula 3, Formula 2, and now Formula 1. And again, you've got to be an incredibly strong athlete to be in F1. And also as well, the pay. Lewis Hamilton's on $50 million a year. You wouldn't just see some random guy who drives a lorry down the M25 making that money, would you? And if you can, sign me up to be a lorry driver because I'm after $50 million a year. And again, the exposure. You're on TV. Just final thing for me, John. You said there about again darts and snooker and stuff, and it got me thinking about the Olympics. Because in the Olympics you have, and this is like final thing for me, a statement to you as well. So again, in the Olympics, of course, you have the conventional things, running, swimming, all that. You have rowing, cycling. There, of course, sports. But you could borderline it still and say, again, are these actually sports? The big in the Olympics, obviously are done throughout the year, like the regattas and, of course, the indoor championships on the velodrome and the Tour de France and things like that. But again, are they complete sports? But then you also have other sports. So, for example, you do archery, shooting, ping pong, badminton, squash. And then for Tokyo next year, we're adding rock climbing. And again, a lot of other Olympics add different things. Yeah. So again, for those kind of sports like ping pong and badminton and all that, would you say they were a sport? Because they're not really done throughout the year. Yes, you're inside. Yes, you're not doing much, especially shooting or archery. You might not be doing much archery. You're just firing an arrow at a board. But again, you're in the Olympics. And when you think of the Olympics, everyone who competes in the Olympics, I've just said there the word compete, is classed as an athlete. So if you're an athlete, does that mean you're a sportsman? And if you were doing something like ping pong or something like that in the Olympics, would that make you an athlete? And would that in turn make that a sport? What do you think?
Well, in a lot of Olympic sports, you're required to use like your physical body, like I said before about Formula One drivers, like they've got to train hard to get prepared for their their racing as well, like mentally as well. It's also like going to take a lot of mental strain on them. It's going to be the same with like people who compete in the Olympics, like you said, because again, you could just easily simplify them sports down. You just putting a big like long arrow into a board, you jumping into a sand pit, you're running on a track. Like do you class them as sport? Like there's no like official competitive table. It's just like whoever wins gets that gold medal. But you train hard, and like I said, like even in Olympic sports, that's an individual performance in some degree. Then but behind the scenes, there's a team supporting that particular guy to go off and go and win, or guy or woman to go off and win as many medals as they possibly can for their country, and of course maybe their group as a whole for for whatever. So, and like it's broadcasted all over across the world. Even though that like you can't exactly physically, you're not exactly running on a racetrack. You're not like jumping into a sandpit. Like you can't physically see the body doing all the work. It's also that's when the brand comes in as a motor sport. Like it's got all the nature of a sport, like the tables and everything, the prize and all that, blah blah blah. But you're in a car. That's all it is. That's probably the only difference between like going to the Olympics and in Formula One. And a lot of people have been banging on that drum of getting Formula One into the Olympics, which I think is a bit of a don't think it would probably be classed as like an official Olympic sport, because you've got to build the car, you've got to have the chassis, you've got to have the tracks. There's a lot of things to take into account with this sport, which is a lot of people, maybe even like if someone who doesn't really think anything of Formula One just going, oh, I'll tell you what, let's put Formula One into the Olympics. That would be a really good idea. It's like, well, you've just haven't thought about anything else. Like I said, like the building process, who's going to be the driver, who's going to be driving it, who's going to sponsor it, who's going to be whatever. Like you've got all them things to take into account, because a lot of money is in the sport of course, like I said, Formula One. But yeah, I think it's all about understanding that in particular sport. There is like a definition of what a sport is, but it's almost like asking who is the best sportsman of all time, who's the best driver of all time, who's the best football team of all time. It's going to be an opinion. There isn't going to be, not everyone is going to be on the same page. Yes, it is a sport, and no, it isn't a sport. Like, you're not going to have 100% of each. It's always going to be 60-40, 50-50, or 30-20, or 30-70, depending on
30-20.
Depending on
Nice
which one. Yeah, and it's always going to rumble on, and it's always how you see, how you see a sport, as whether you see it as a sport or not. Just because you say it isn't a sport doesn't mean to say it isn't a sport. You know what I mean? Like, because it is classed as a sport, but if you want to go around and say it isn't a sport, then all fair be it. It's only an opinion. Just be careful about those people who will come at you when they go, whoa, hang on a minute, it is a sport. But like, yeah, I think this could rumble on for quite some time as well, and yeah, I think there's nothing really much more to say on it, because I think we've kind of covered all the basics and covered as much as we possibly could in that regard. But no, I think ultimately, like, we know Formula One, it is a sport. It's demanding. There's teams involved. It's very physical. The car does the majority of the work, which you could go, right, okay, it's probably taking a little bit of sport out of it, but still, the drivers have got to be physically fit. They've got to be physically ready to get into a car, drive that car, and put on a really good show as well as a whole, because, like I said, partly agreeing with Grosjean, it is a show. It's entertainment. Yes, it is. But with kind of what Grosjean was saying, you've just kind of said, well, it's not a sport, but it is a sport, because you just said it's a show. It's an entertainment. But yeah, that is a sport. Not just sport, it's other things as well. So yeah, I think there's gonna be a few more words to say to those people who do turn around to us and go, Formula One isn't a sport, or just people just driving cars around a circle a lot of the time. Because you look at Monaco Lisle. That's a funny looking circle, isn't it? I've never seen a circle like that before in my life. Or Silverstone or Spa. You know what I mean? It is very, very weird. But would you final part on this? Would you agree that it's just people that it's just an opinion? The whole is F1 a sport, that you'll never have an official written it down in black and white going, it is definitely a sport and you can't disagree with it. That's how it is. Do you think it's like it is similar to like there is like who is the best driver of all time? Who's the best team of all time? Who's the best whatever of all time? You know, do you think that it would fall into that bracket of questions, like the almost unanswered questions where like it's just opinions that will be the answers?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, yeah, a lot of this is definitely your opinion. We have all these things on Sky Sports, and watch them how you will. Watch your sport, you know, and yeah, it's just it's all out there. And maybe that's again another thing, like so on Sky Sports, for example, and BT, they show all these things, and you don't have to watch all of them and just love sports. Like we always make that joke, you know, Homer Simpson, TV sports. You know, you don't have to just watch all these sports. Just watch what you like. And yeah, we all have favourite sports, and you know, go and like them. But yes, obviously, leave it in the comment section below, guys. What do you think? I mean, I'm expecting a lot of you guys to say it is a sport because, you know, you are Formula 1 fans. But again, don't be scared to say that it's not. Tell us why as well. Again, we're having the debate. Of course, you've just heard from there. You know, it's not, obviously, we're not saying that. But again, Roman Grosjean, you know, they're not scared to say that it's not. Yeah. Again, that is his opinion as well. So again, leave it in the comment section. But look, anyways, guys, that is the end of our episode. Thank you very much for watching. One last thing before we end. And this is an incredible, like, my mind is blown. Our minds are blown about this. There is stories coming out that a few races for the end of the 2020 season, this incredibly weird season where we were promised no fans, are coming out. The Portuguese Grand Prix and now even the Belgian Grand Prix have stories that they're going to actually be allowing attendance at the race. And the Portuguese Grand Prix has actually sold over 1,000 Grand Prix tickets to the event. Now again, you know, we don't know too much about that, and we will for sure be covering that in 24/7 News and in our future F1 debate shows. But we are getting very close to having fans at the Grand Prix. It's absolutely incredible. So yes, hopefully we do get that very, very soon. Mugello, the Ferrari 1000 Grand Prix, there has been talk for a few months now about having fans there to, of course, celebrate the massive achievement of Ferrari being 1,000 races old. I'd like to see that happen. I know you guys would as well. So yes, hopefully we'll get to that stage later in this year. Anyways, obviously we'll be covering that later on. So I'll say that's the episode done. Thank you very much for watching. Leave in the comment section below everything we've mentioned in this video. Formula 1, is it a sport? All the other sports. The question I asked about cricket as well. Have you ever driven a Formula 1 car? And yes, just give us your opinions. Of course, we love reading the comment section. We like you to get all fiery. If you agree or disagree with us, obviously tell us why. We don't mind. But yes, explain why. But nevertheless, we do hope that you obviously agree and like the episode. If you are new to the F1 Debate Show, please like and subscribe. Stick around for all of the content we have coming your way for the rest of the season. Of course, we're in the midst of the 70th anniversary Grand Prix. We hope you've enjoyed Friday and today's action. Tomorrow will be the live race reaction done by Jordan on the other side of the screen. Again, we hope you're enjoying them. Of course, if you haven't watched them and if it's your first time, we hope that you enjoyed tomorrow's live reaction on YouTube. And yes, we hope that you enjoyed the channel for the rest of the season and, of course, going forward. Anyways, thank you very much for watching. We've been the F1 Debate Show. Stay safe out there. And until next time, guys, we'll see you later.
See you later, guys.